What if the dead could accuse? Imagine a packed church, candles guttering, a butchered body on the bier, and a trembling suspect ordered to touch it. Suddenly, the wounds weep, people scream, verdict delivered by God. This was cruentation. Across German lands, Scandinavia, and parts of England, judges staged it so corpses might bleed afresh to name killers. It appears in the Nibelungenlied, saturates sermons, and in Germany lingered into the 18th century. Sometimes it ended trials. Sometimes it triggered mobs and confessions. By the end, you'll see how theology, fear, and theater twisted a graveside ritual into courtroom proof. Ready? Now. The law that made the dead speak was as simple as it was terrifying. A judge or priest set the victim on a bier, stripped to show every wound. The suspect was ordered to approach. Circle the body, call the dead by name, lay a hand on the gash. If fresh blood welled, God had judged. People swore they saw it happen. Red beads rising, foam at the lips, a twitch of the fingers. Picture it like a medieval lie detector with an audience and a crucifix. But here's the twist. This wasn't a sideshow on the church steps. In the German lands, in Scandinavia, and even parts of England and Scotland, cruentation, the law of the bier, sat beside oaths, character witnesses, and inquests. It didn't always convict alone, but it could tip a council, trigger a confession, or unleash a lynch mob. Today we rely on DNA and chain of custody. Back then, they trusted stages, psalms, and a corpse. Imagine being the suspect. Cool stone floor, wax and incense. The priest's voice, touch the wound, your palm meets cold flesh. The crowd holds its breath. What they see next decides your life. And the next case proved it. 1503 Etiswil, quiet Swiss village, very loud scandal. A woman named Margaretha dies too suddenly. Her husband, Hans Spies, bolts from town. Bad look. He's dragged back and marched to the churchyard. The whole village spills in. Bells, torches, whispers. Spies is made to circle her body, touch her wounds, speak her name. According to the account that spread like wildfire, the corpse bled afresh when he laid hands on her. Gasps ricocheted off the nave. That, to them, was God in real time. Here's the real twist. This was not pre-science. It was part of a legal culture that asked heaven to weigh in when earthly proof ran thin. A modern prosecutor might chase toxicology. A medieval judge reached for ritual. The rite shaped everything, whether a confession came that night, whether kin demanded vengeance, whether the town believed the verdict wasn't just legal, but cosmic. And in places like Lucerne and farther north into Silesia and Moravia, town records show officials not only allowed the rite, they staged it deliberately. Imagine your courtroom swearing in a witness who's a corpse. Awful? Absolutely. But it fit a world where blood cried out like Abel's. Next, when legend wrote the script. You think folk tales are harmless? The Nibelungenlied, c. 1200, locks this ritual into Europe's imagination. Siegfried is laid on the bier. His killer, Hagen, steps near. The wounds bleed anew. Boom, guilt made visible. That scene wasn't just poetry. It echoed what people swore they'd seen at real funerals and real trials. That's how culture works. Story reflects practice. Then practice borrows stagecraft from story. It's like a true crime podcast that starts changing how juries feel about evidence. The twist is that the poem treats the bleeding as fate's testimony, a righteous outrage that even warriors fear. When parish preachers later told moral tales, they didn't need to explain cruentation. Their listeners already knew it. In a village where the only light at night was the moon and the sanctuary lamp, the thought that a murderer's presence could wake blood felt like justice made visible. Compare it to modern courtroom enhancements, computer animations, 3D reconstructions. Those are performances of truth, too. The medieval version simply swapped software for incense and a shrouded form. And when belief is that thick, one drop is enough. But belief doesn't stop at poetry. It walks into court with chains. Scotland, 1688, one of the last and loudest. Sir James Stansfield lies dead. Suspicion coils around his son, Philip. The body is lifted. Witnesses swear. When Philip's hand touches his father's neck, blood leaps to his skin. Philip blurts, "Lord, have mercy upon me!" The crown pounces. The Lord Advocate calls it providence, furnishing a full probation. Judges allow it. Philip is convicted of parricide, executed, tongue cut out, body hung in chains. Think about that. Late 17th century. Coffee houses buzz with science and skepticism. Yet in Edinburgh, a bleeding corpse still counts as evidence. The unexpected angle? Even legal minds were torn. Some jurists grumbled it was a superstition. Others called it God's seal when facts fogged over. The crowd didn't care. They'd seen crimson and heard a gasp. In our era, a single viral clip can tilt public opinion. In theirs, a smear of fresh blood could tilt the law. The Stansfield case became a warning and a relic. The last flare of a medieval proof in a world about to prefer microscopes to miracles. But north of the North Sea, versions lingered longer. Denmark, Norway, and catechisms did more than tolerate it. They preached it. In early modern Denmark and Norway, the beer ordeal didn't vanish with the Reformation. It adapted. Lutheran monarchies leaned on orthodoxy and order, but parish life still used ritual to sort truth from lies. Clergy sometimes oversaw corpse tests. Town courts let entire communities file past the dead, eyes flicking to a stitch, a bruise, a mouth that seemed to froth. Sometimes the bleeding didn't even require touch. Just the murderer's approach set the tail off. Here's the twist. Official doctrine often frowned at superstition, yet practice on the ground kept faith with the old ordeal when a killing shook the parish. Call it cognitive dissonance by candlelight. We do it too. We ban Ouija boards and binge ghost hunts. The same culture that prints medical handbooks will still leave flowers at a roadside cross and whisper to the dead. In the Danish-Norwegian Union, learned men might urge restraint from pulpits. Local officers still staged beer tests because they calmed a terrified town, and more to the point, produced offenders who cracked under pressure. Bleeding didn't always convict, but it could break, and breaking was enough. Next, the German law books and pulpits that defended it in print. Enter the manuals, the heavy hitters of Saxon criminal law. Jurists like Benedict Karpzov, compiling thick Latin tomes in the 17th century, tried to systematize how to handle homicide when proof was scarce. They cataloged proofs, weighed testimony, warned against abuses, and in those pages, the dead body became a kind of legal instrument. Karpzov didn't invent cruentation, but his world assumed cases where the beer ordeal assisted truth. Meanwhile, demonologists and kings, Think James VI and I talked freely of bodies testifying, wounds opening in a murderer's presence. Preachers raided the book of Genesis. Thy brother's blood cries to me from the ground. The twist? Skeptics were already muttering. English common lawyers increasingly privileged eyewitnesses and circumstantial chains over wonders. Sir Matthew Hale, a generation after the Civil Wars, warned judges to be humble about spectacle, witchcraft or otherwise, and to seek sober proof. But villages don't read law reports. They remember funerals. They remember the corpse that blushed red. And so officials, wanting peace, wanting closure, kept a foot in both worlds. Read an oath, then stage a miracle. If both aligned, the sentence felt invincible. If they didn't, rumor supplied the glue, and rumor had teeth. Sermons supercharged the rite. You can almost hear the cadence. Blood cries for vengeance. God unmasks the wicked. Printed postals, those fat collections of model sermons, pack the pulpits of the 16th and 17th centuries. Parish priests and Lutheran preachers alike mined cautionary tales where corpses bled in the presence of the guilty, not just to scare the crowd, to catechize a rule. God sees, and sometimes God shows. Here's the twist. Moralists deployed cruentation to police more than murder. They used it to warn against false oaths, secret sins, even domestic cruelty. That sermonizing gave laypeople a working script. If the suspect looked pale, if the corpse looked wet, Providence had spoken. Imagine an influencer thread that turns a rumor into a rule. The algorithm is theology. Modern comparison? The courtroom where expert witnesses explain science to juries already primed by TV crime dramas. The CSI effect. In both ages, performance meets expectation. The beer ordeal worked because the audience wanted a world where the hidden is forced into the open. And so they watched. And when a drop fell, they roared. But the same megaphone could amplify hate. And the next twist is ugly. Cruentation fed blood libel. Medieval polemicists like Thomas of Cantimpré spun tales where Christian child corpses bled at the sight of Jewish neighbors, proof of ritual murder. It was slander weaponized by spectacle. Processions carried small bodies through crowded streets. If a drop appeared, decomposition, jostling, pressure, it verified the story and justified violence. That's the darkest truth of the beer ordeal. It could direct public fury at whomever the story primed them to hate. No microscope, no defense counsel with lab reports, just a moving altar of grief and accusation. Think of how fast a doctored clip or a false rumor can trigger mobs online today. Now delete the internet and add incense and a martyr's hymn. The result was lives burned out of towns, fines, expulsions, graves dug with hate. Cruentation looked like justice because it looked like God. But in the wrong hands, it turned faith into fuel. And yet, even without prejudice, the right carried risk. Bodies bleed after death for natural reasons. Communities didn't want to hear that. A gush at the wrong moment could end a bloodline. And yes, sometimes that's exactly what the officials intended. The theater was carefully staged. Manuals describe choreography. Corpse supine, wounds visible. Suspect steps close, circles twice, whispers the name, strokes the gash. Sometimes the entire village paraded past. Grandmothers, shepherd boys, the miller with flour on his sleeves, so no one could say the test missed the real killer. The twist here is procedural psychology. Officers knew pressure plus spectacle breaks people. A suspect who kept a flat face under the gaze of 100 neighbors, a priest, and a grieving widow was rare. Most swayed. They trembled. They wept. A few confessed outright. Today, police interrogations obsess over body language, micro-expressions, tells. That's what cruentation fed on. The expectant hush, the human urge to explain the inexplicable. If you were guilty, terror might make you see the blood that wasn't there. If you were innocent, panic might still put a crimson sheen on sweat. As for the physical phenomenon, one shove of the coffin, one shift in the bier's angle, one hand pressing the rib cage. Tiny vessels burst. Live ore shifts. Fluids purge. The crowd cries, "Miracle." The judge says, "Providence." The sentence falls, and with it, a precedent. Next, the biology, the ritual accidentally weaponized. The dead do bleed, after a fashion. Post-mortem lividity pools blood-independent tissues. Move the body and color shifts. Gas builds. Pressure forces reddish purge from mouth and nose. Wounds ooze when manipulated. None of that requires a murderer hovering nearby. Just gravity, time, heat, and hands. Early modern scientists groped toward this. Some physicians tried to save the phenomenon, reconcile faith with physiology by arguing vapors, subtle motions, divine permission riding natural channels. But as autopsies spread, the old miracle wobbled. Coroners learned that turning a body or pressing near a wound could answer with fluid. Judges began hearing a new language: lividity, coagulum, putrefaction. The twist? People still preferred a universe where God shouted. Cold blood rising felt like cosmic justice, not chemistry. It's the same sensation we chase when we say, "The universe gave me a sign." The beer ordeal tasted like meaning in a world that could be brutally random. Yet the medical lens kept grinding finer. In time, the only speaking a corpse would be allowed to do was under a scalpel, on a table, with a physician's Latin translating the silence. And still, one last pocket fought back. Scotland's bar, already with one foot in modernity. Not every jurist nodded along. In England, rising common law skepticism chafed at wonders. Sir Matthew Hale urged caution, humility, patience. Yes, he condemned witches, but he also wrote rules to keep judges from being swept by spectacle. Coroners demanded inquests instead of pageants. A jury might view a body, but increasingly they wanted patterns, timelines, wounds mapped to weapons, not God's finger. The twist in this pivot is emotional. Cruentation didn't just resolve doubt, it soothed grief. It told bereaved families the universe cared enough to bleed with them. The new regime, papers, autopsies, expert testimony, felt cold, secular, even cruel, especially when it acquitted. That's the same backlash you see when forensic evidence clears a suspect, but a community clings to a story. In the 17th and 18th centuries, as medical jurisprudence grew teeth, cruentation lost its legal bite, lingering in folk practice, broadsides, and murder ballads. A few late courts still let it in on a technicality, or as corroboration. But each year, the candles dimmed. The beer gave way to the slab. We traded oracles for autopsies. Justice didn't feel as mystical. It did, however, grow less theatrical and, often, more just. So why did it hold for centuries? Because it solved three problems at once. First, it gave a community a visible verdict when proof was thin. Second, it scared the living straight. Who wants to be the man whose touch wakes blood? Third, it made a moral world. A universe that bleeds to expose the wicked is intensely satisfying. The twist, as always, is cost. Satisfying worlds can be dangerous. The beer ordeal could convict the guilty. It could also target the hated. It could explain red trickles produced by heat and time. It turned mourning into a referendum, pain into prophecy. Modern comparison? Trial by media. A narrative catches, a clip circulates, a crowd decides it has seen everything it needs, and the legal process scrambles to keep up. Cruentation was the same impulse, sanctified. It worked, until it didn't. As surgeons' knives and jurists' pens replaced incense and psalms, the law felled this ritual. But the hunger behind it never died. We still want the dead to speak, the hidden to be unveiled, the universe to point a finger. Which brings us to the final reckoning. What this rite leaves behind, and why you can almost hear it echo today. Imagine this last scene. 18th century Germany. Officials have half embraced autopsy, half clung to the beer. A magistrate lets the ritual proceed. For the peace of the town, then quietly commissions a physician's report. The corpse is the same. The audience is the same. But the meaning is split. Two truths claim the same blood. The technical report whispers mechanism, lividity, gas, purge. The congregation hears miracle, vengeance, revelation, God. That is how cruentation dies, not in a single decree, but in a tug-of-war between ways of seeing. And that is why its ghost haunts us. We still chase the feeling that reality will side with the victim in a way we can watch. We dress it up in dashboards and datasets and lab coats now, but it's the same human ache. Let the truth appear. Here's the real twist. Sometimes, even in our age, a spectacle still decides the verdict. A body cam leak, a grainy hallway video, a replay in slow motion. We swear we saw guilt bleed out, and we stop listening. The beer ordeal taught us something dark and necessary. Justice loves a show. It's our job to know when we're watching theater and when we're finally seeing proof. We began with a candlelit church and a silent witness, a butchered body on a bier, and asked a blasphemous question. Can the dead accuse? After marching through Swiss churchyards, German law books, Danish pulpits, and a Scottish scaffold, the answer is darker and more human than legend. Cruentation was never just a spooky relic. It was a social technology. It choreographed grief into evidence, fear into verdict, spectacle into peace. The sight of fresh blood in a suspect's presence felt like the universe answering the victim. In towns starved for certainty, that answer was irresistible and devastating. What made it so powerful wasn't only theology, it was psychology. Picture the setup. A crowded nave, neighbors pressed shoulder to shoulder, a priest chanting psalms, the shroud turned back to expose ragged wounds. The suspect is ordered to circle, to touch, to whisper the name of the dead. Any tremor becomes a tell. Any tiny ooze becomes a revelation. The living project hope onto the dead, and the dead, shifted, pressed, warmed by hands and candles, sometimes seemed to answer. The ritual satisfied a hunger we still recognize, the craving for a moral cosmos that reacts on cue in public. Today we prefer DNA, autopsies, and camera timestamps. But the appetite behind the rite, the ache for truth to appear, is the same. And the cost is the same, too. The rite could console the bereaved and also mislead them. Natural post-mortem changes, lividity pooling, purge fluids, shifting blood, can mimic confession. Worse, the rite gave hatred a stage. Processions that swore to reveal killers sometimes revealed only bigotry, letting crowds read prejudice into a crimson smear and call it providence. That is the ugliest lesson. A community primed for miracle is a community primed for scapegoats. The same candles that promised clarity could burn down a life that did not deserve it. So what do we carry from this buyer into our own courts and comment sections? First, that evidence must be stronger than spectacle. A show, no matter how sacred, is not a proof. Second, that communities crave closure so intensely they will accept theater in its place. If we want better justice, we must offer better answers, faster, fairer, clearer, so fear has less room to hire a stage. Third, that grief is vulnerable. In every age, someone tries to recruit sorrow for their story. Resist the narrator who brandishes a scene and calls it certainty. Demand the record, the method, the chain of custody. There is one last echo I can't shake. In those churches, the ritual didn't only pressure the accused. It warned the bystanders. The sight of a bloodied body made a promise. The world remembers what you do in the dark. Whether or not the wound opened on cue, that promise is worth keeping. We should live as if truth will surface. We should build systems that help it surface without breaking the innocent on the way. Let the dead speak through careful hands and honest reports, not through pageants dressed as proof. Imagine for a moment the bier finally left alone. The candles gutter. The crowd drifts home. The suspect, guilty or not, sits with his sleepless heart. The widow closes her door. The priest stacks the psalter. Night settles. No miracle arrives. Only the slow work of inquiry remains. That is our inheritance from the death of cruentation. A hard patience. A promise to choose proof over performance, even when the performance feels holy, even when it feels like justice. So here's my question to you. Now that you've walked the aisle and stared at the shroud, when you meet a modern spectacle, a clip, a headline, a perfect narrative, will you ask for the autopsy, or will you applaud the blood? Tell me in the comments what shocked you most. The ceremony that made corpses testify, or the way its logic still echoes in our feeds. If this journey unsettled and illuminated you, subscribe for more dark history. Share this episode with a friend who loves true crime done right. And hit, like if you're grateful we live in a world where answers no longer depend on a trembling hand at a bleeding bier.